Before we get into it, I need to warn you. The topic discussed here may ruffle some feathers, and if you feel the need to click off this video, then clearly you're not ready to hear what needs to be said. Where do I even begin? I'm well aware talking about this may add fuel to a very volatile fire in our modern discussions in America. We grew up interpreting and understanding the world around us in many different ways. Such cases even include generational but also geological. When we look into the past, the official story concludes the events in World War II was catastrophic. A perpetuating novel of the greatest evils humanity had ever seen. The thing is, though, we aren't innocent either. We forget critical moments of our past, we overlook finer details, and sometimes, we purposely bury it because the truth hurts too much. Ironic, isn't it? All we want is the truth, even though it hurts. Conveniently enough, when the truth hurts we choose ignorance. To pretend it never happened because our egos are too fragile. We whine and lash out like children. However, that's not necessarily the worst. Then again, we conveniently live with a fringe group of extremists, who by and large, commit genuine acts of terrorism. The thing is though, there is a difference between a terrorist and a revolutionary. Sitting governments would rule revolutionary groups as terrorists to remain in power, corrupting not only meaning but language. And actual terrorists, who do cause genuine fear and disorderly to spread chaos, regardless of their message. The difference between a revolutionary and a terrorist is this: public perception. If what you're doing is resonating with people, and I don't mean small communities, I mean society itself to change the political landscape, you are a revolutionary. If what you're doing is causing fear, hysteria, panic, and chaos, you are by definition a terrorist. The best example I can give here is when you play Detroit, Become Human. However, that's not really why I'm making this video. In this video, I'm talking about what we consider in the modern world as the most evil man to exist, despite Joseph Stalin ruling Soviet Russia and that whole other can of crimes against humanity. Who is this evil I'm speaking of? Adolf Hitler. The worst of humanity says it has ever seen. The thing is though, was he really? I'm only asking that question because I want you to think about it. However, I'm not answering that question here. What I will ask is this: who was Adolf Hitler? Moreover, why did he become this great evil we know him to be? When we think about Adolf Hitler and the things he did, do we do it without bias? Or do we truly try to understand the man, and perhaps learn from it? You can ask anyone, even ChatGPT, what were the justifications for the war crimes and genocide Hitler committed during his reign in Nazi Germany? Everyone, including an AI chatbot, will tell you there isn't one. Crazy thought to realize is, there is always a justification for anything. Because we are looking for a reason why things happened, not looking at how it makes us feel. Before World War II, Adolf Hitler was born April 20, 1889, Austria-Hungary. His father, Alois Hitler, a harsh authoritarian Austrian customs official who demanded obedience from his children. His mother, Clara, was loving and caring, often shielding Adolf from his father's temper. Alois Hitler was strict and physically abusive, often beating Adolf and his siblings. He wanted Adolf to become a civil servant, however Hitler despised the idea and dreamed of being an artist instead. This caused frequent conflicts between him and his father. Thing is as well, Alois had 2 previous wives before marrying Adolf's mother, Clara Pölzl. Reading this suggests to me Adolf Hitler grew up with a supportive mother, but a father who we could argue had his own way of loving his children. Then again, beating them into submission I don't think anyone would view as being a good parental figure, considering there are infinitely more constructive ways to raise a kid. I argue Adolf's early life with his father already began to build resentment to not just authority, but slowly turned Adolf into a rebel of sorts. All he wanted to do was be an artist, not some authority figure. Looking at the rest of his family, most of his siblings died to various reasons, which in reference to history made Hitler become detached, so to speak. Perhaps detached from death? In the end, we can argue he wasn't as fazed with death being so close to his family. When he was in school, he was bright and ambitious and, as previously stated, rebellious, rejecting authority, even his school, despite excelling at things he enjoyed, art and history. Where everything else he was failing, especially after Alois's death, he refused to conform to school rules, causing frequent clashes with teachers. My best theory so far suggests Adolf hated authority because it reminded him of his abusive father, and as such wanted nothing to do with it. Later in life he tried to live his life as an artist, applying twice, 1907 and 1908, to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna. However, he was rejected. This was also during the time his mother had died. Doctors diagnosed Adolf as grief-stricken. I'd argue this is where he felt so alone in a hard world, living in hovels and men's homeless shelters. This really is only a brief summary to Hitler's early life, and more has yet to be considered. World War I? What a shit show. The thing is though, the details here aren't necessarily relevant for what I'm talking about today. Except for that, he had some military experience. However, the important part I want to mention is the implication of the United States' involvement for creating the genocidal dictatorial tyrant we know of as Adolf Hitler. Not all the blame is on the US back then, because the US was just one of the allies who had signed the Treaty of Versailles, but thanks to the treaty, the Allies stripped all of the strategic and any remaining valuable land from Germany that hadn't been destroyed. In essence, Germany was inadvertently dictated to starve and die because of the treaty. Ironic, isn't it? Sanctioning Germany with the Treaty of Versailles to prevent another war, only to create another one not even 30 years later. Crazy part is, I have no doubt Adolf saw the effects the treaty had on the average German as well. However, he had more hatred for those in German government than he did for the United States. By this point, we recognize Hitler had this extreme sense of hatred for groups of people. Hatred which can be led back to his early life with his father, Alois Hitler. There is always a justification for any action. And there's always a reason behind every idea. Hatred doesn't simply exist. It first must fester and be given reason to exist, purpose. If we took a moment to deep dive into the rabbit hole, there are arguments Hitler was viewed as a revolutionary but also a terrorist by others. History is written by the victors, and Hitler's rise is often told as one of tyranny and terror. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many Germans at the time didn't see him as a villain. They saw him as a necessary force of change. Was he a terrorist, or just the inevitable product of a desperate nation? What I found fascinating in trying to figure out how to write this. I talked to ChatGPT for some insight in how Hitler chose his targets. What have I discovered? An epiphany. It boils down to one simple concept: the repeat of history. For those who hadn't really spent the time to look into it, the downfall of Germany in World War I and II wasn't the fault of the Jews, or any others he targeted. Ironic enough, it was the very own Germans in Germany who ruled government, as well as the special interest groups at the time, were the real reason. Take it as you will. I've always found the story being Adolf Hitler, just a little bit off. Ask yourself, was Hitler a scapegoat? Because looking into history, he had some validity to his ideals. However, they weren't entirely true either. Hitler looked outward for Germany's enemies, blaming Jews, communists, and outsiders. But the real architects of Germany's collapse? They were within his own borders. Pulling the strings long before he ever rose to power, Hitler's true enemy would have been the same German special interest groups, and the Germans in government who made Germany, even before World War I, such a poor-as-fuck country. A convenient notion to mention as well? How well off the elites in Germany were thriving, despite Germany's economy before, during, and even after World War II. I want to mention the Treaty of Versailles, based on mere recent understanding, mainly added on top of the bullshit Germany was suffering from. The Germans in government and the special interest groups there were already collapsing Germany. As a result, a manipulated but also fabricated sense of reality for Hitler to blame the Jews for everything, leaving the true actors in crime left not to blame. I'm not trying to argue or justify or defend the indefensible. People will argue Hitler was the true evil man who did all these evil things. And I'd argue, okay, so who's the special interest groups who practically run America? Because I'm trying to shine light to a point I've been wanting to make for a while. Adolf Hitler wasn't entirely to blame for World War II and the genocide. Anyone paying attention knows Hitler grew up in a troubled home, his adult life, Mein Kampf, as his life was labeled. Hitler, I argue, was a troubled child who was manipulated to serve a purpose, and he blindly achieved that purpose flawlessly. But what if I told you? The real enablers of Nazi Germany were not just Hitler and his men, but the power structures that existed long before him, structures that still exist today. Or if we pay attention to history and contrast to modern times. But the same problem exists. How do we not see it? You'll find your answer by simply looking into a mirror. Actually, let's circle back to a question I asked a little bit ago. Was Adolf Hitler really the worst humanity says it has ever seen? Hey you! Hit subscribe! And don't forget to turn on the bell notification for your daily upload alerts. Give it a share. Leave a like and make a comment.